lovely to have you around. Lovely to have you here. Please, I know you don't need an introduction, but can you please introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Yat. I'm chairman and co-founder of Animoca Brands. So we're a company that's focused on building what we call the open metaverse, very much focused on delivering digital property rights. We've made over 450 investments to date, and we also are, the owners of companies like the Sandbox, and Phantom Galaxies, and River Racing, and Tiny Tap, and NHS, and a whole bunch of other companies within the group that is known as Animoca Brands.
Amazing. It's an honor to have you here. And we were just mentioning a little bit about how the world is changing, how Web3 is such an important part of this change, and how we both agree that there's completely different feelings both in Asia and the Middle East about Web3.
Yeah.
So can you tell me your thoughts on this?
Well, first of all, I think because of Asia's sort of forward policy, so it's not just about builders, it's actually the governments themselves. There's Singapore, but then there's also Hong Kong that has really sort of put forward much activity in the Web3 space. It basically, the government has basically sort of allowed not just the ETFs, but actually allowed sort of retail crypto trading and put forward sort of policies around that. Japan has basically also made Web3 in the metaverse basically a part of their national sort of growth agenda. And of course, we're here in Dubai, clearly, under the leadership and direction of basically both, sort of the government, but also, VARA and so on have really been pushing forward the sort of digital assets agenda. So you see a positive vibe that's built not just from the entrepreneurial activity, but also because government is actively encouraging it and is investing in it and is building it and telling good things about it, in contrast to other places around the world, which actually has caused a situation where people are leaving, for instance, places like the US to come to Asia or come to Middle East, which I would say is an unusual thing. In the past, it's always been the other way around. So it's been very interesting to see that positive energy. Token 2049 in Singapore didn't feel like a bear at all. It was like bull, bull, bull. And I think it was, but it wasn't about the output. It was a sense of optimism. There was a lot of hope, a lot of optimism, and there was just positive energy all around.
And of course, this positive energy is translated now into WOW Summit, right?
Absolutely, exactly. And I mean, even here at WOW Summit, taking a look at basically all the people that are coming around, you can see there's an energy, there's an excitement, there's an interest in this. And I mean, the next 2 to 3 weeks in Dubai and the Middle East has so many events that are focused on Web3. I mean, this enthusiasm and the capital needed to support it has to come from someplace, right? And so obviously, clearly, I would say there is a positive momentum here.
Wonderful. And I mean, what are your main expectations and what are you excited about this WOW Summit?
Well, I think for WOW Summit, most of it is just meeting interesting new people, talking about sort of, where we think the open metaverse has to go. I think this being a much more sort of Web3 native type of conference, I think the goal that I have here is to basically sort of tell a story and explain to people our mission as to how we bring more people into the space. So it's different, right? And if you go talk in a Web2 conference, or a conference that is not up with so many Web3 native people, it's more about explaining to them why Web3 matters. Whereas for this community, they know why Web3 matters. You don't have to talk about that. But I think it's more about how do you bring the people who don't know our space into the space. And we kind of live a little bit in our own bubble, right? When we talk about sort of crypto and wallets and DeFi, and we sort of speak an alien language. It may be English, but it sounds weird. And I think this is something that we need to be better at because we're not being inclusive. And sometimes might even unintentionally come across as a little bit of arrogance. Even when we say Web2 versus Web3, what are we actually saying? We're saying you're Web2, you're behind. We're Web3, we're the future. Actually, even that statement itself has a connotation of hierarchy, of rank, which actually is not what the space is about.
No.
So we have to sort of become aware of that and be better in that conversation, I think.
Yes, of course. I mean, I don't know if you agree, but the next step for the industry should be, mainstream
mass
adoption.
Absolutely,
right?
mass adoption. Exactly.
I think it's obvious. So, what do you think are the main steps and actions different companies should take in order to really encourage mass adoption?
So, I think there's a couple areas. We focus heavily on two. One of them is obviously gaming. We think gaming is a big area because so many people, over 3 billion people play games, and they already believe they should own their digital assets. They just don't understand it. And this comes to the second point, which is basically education. So we need to spend a lot of time on education. That's why we invested and supported things like Tiny Tap and Open Campus and the whole sort of framework around EDU to basically help build out education and understand why it's valuable in the space, because again, that's missing. People don't quite understand sort of what is Web3, what is the value around that, why should I even care? The part about Web3 education comes with financial literacy. If you're an actual Web3 native person, you have become more financially literate.
Yes.
Right? You can't actually be in Web3 without financial literacy, and that's the gap. Because financial literacy pre-Web3 was mostly if you're in finance. Or if
it's not taught in schools.
Yeah, it's not taught in schools. We teach our kids algebra. Why don't we teach them economics?
Yeah.
Why don't we teach them compound interest? Right? I mean, it's straightforward. And the problem is because even the teachers who teach them know nothing about it, right? So that's a paradigm of the shift and change. So I think gaming can help with that, but also education. So I think these are the areas, and we as an industry need to do more to sort of advocate for that. Because sometimes we just make the assumption, why don't you know, right? And sometimes the conversation is a little bit like, when we call them normies, when we call,
but why would they be motivated
to
come in, right?
Exactly. And we're making it unfriendly for them as well. So we have to be much more friendlier, I think, as an industry. We do want them in. We know that they're important. And also I think that means we need to soften ourselves around the edges a bit. It's, like, for instance, some people who are very maximalist about their philosophical principles around crypto. I understand and respect that, but you're not going to grow the space if you force those particular views onto people who don't even understand or think about it. You have to be much more sort of, softer around the edges.
Absolutely, I completely agree. Do you have any other comments about Web Summit, about your the future, how you see things evolving?
Well, I mean, first of all, I think one of the things that I'm super excited about Web3 is obviously this sort of the paradigm of ownership. I think still today, people don't, even in our industry, haven't always necessarily made the connection that what we're building is a new kind of capitalism. At least, where we are all stakeholders. That we are able to actually become sort of basically owners in the networks that we can help construct. And part of it has to do, I think, is because the very first wave of many people who entered Web3 were too much financially oriented. Right? They were so financially oriented that they looked at everything as a transaction, which is, of course, understood. Everything we do, even in relationships, are a form of transactions. But the monetary aspect around the transaction doesn't have to be sort of enumerated in such hard terms. Because, for us, culture, traditions, identity is why we exist, right? That matters to us, right? And for a subset of people, it's all around the money. Money facilitates that. But for the majority of the world, it's not about that. And so I think the narrative, which has also sort of covered the world of crypto, has been around sort of the whole money thing. And while it's important, I think we need to step out of that as well. Because again, when we think about mass adoption, people, I think, care about owning things. They care about their sovereign identity. They care about their privacy. They care about their data. They, of course, care to make an income. But money for them is mostly a means to an end. It's not the end in itself. But for a lot of people in the early days that entered the space, particularly when you talk about 2017, 2018 and the whole ICO sort of boom and bust, money was the end, right? And I think that's given the industry a bad reputation. So obviously I feel like that's something that we are obviously moving away from, but the narrative has to shift. And that means maybe we need to think of a new term. Like, when you say crypto, it's already covered with sort of a certain image. When you say Web3, sometimes
what would you say would be a good term?
Well, we've been focusing on the term of digital property rights.
Digital property rights, okay.
But it is maybe a little bit too intellectual, perhaps.
It's
right?
very techy. It's very
exactly. So we have to find a new term. It's like nobody talks about MP3s today anymore. Right?
We should be fun.
Nobody
right?
talks about TCP/IP, but we should be doing it as something that's natural to us. So we just have to think of the new paradigms. And I think as an industry we should come together. I think many people in gaming are thinking about that. And the other thing, of course, is that I do believe that success in Web3, and I think every company that's building this space has to have a part of that as their mission, is to broaden financial literacy, meaning that the way that we ensure that the space becomes safe is not too heavy-handed regulation, but rather broad financial literacy. Meaning success in decentralization means that all of us can actually protect ourselves, right? So if you have good education financial literacy, one of the sort of biggest threats to any democracy is a lack of education. Right? You can't actually have a functioning democracy 500 years ago because most people didn't have the knowledge. They couldn't even read, for instance, right? And so now we have a mechanism where democracy works because you have at least a certain level of education. But what's missing, I think, is the next level, which is sort of not just political systems, but financial literacy. And we actually have the capacity to do so. We just don't teach it, we just don't know it. And to me, that's the sort of where Web3 will go. Like how today, information is a commodity. We have access to all information on our fingertips. The next step would be financial literacy.
And choosing the information correctly, right? So when we consume information.
Yes, but I think choosing the information correctly is, I think, partially a role of AI at this point. I think everyone's going to have autonomous AI agents. I think Web3 and the whole digital asset space will have to play a critical role because the feeding mechanism, obviously, for AI is all going to be, I think, crypto related. AI is going to transact with AI in the form of crypto.
Of course.
They're not going to do this in something that's sort of fiat based. And I actually think that AI is the perfect antidote with the whole sort of information overflow. because humans don't have the capacity to deal with all the information at the speed in which it's coming. For instance, how do I know if this DeFi protocol is a real protocol? How do I know it's not a rug pull? How do I know that in real time? So either I ask a friend, which is obviously also difficult, or maybe have an AI that's able to keep up with what's real and what isn't. So I think that's kind of where it's going to go eventually, where these AI agents will actually be our protectors in the space. In the same way that we all run antivirus programs, we all run anti-spam programs now. In the early days, we received viruses and spams, abound. Exactly, everywhere, right? And now it's, more of a rarity.
Absolutely, yes. Thank you so much for your time. They asked me to keep this brief. I could keep talking to you for 3 hours.
No,
You're
thank you, my
brilliant. And lovely to have you here. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thank you so much.
Let's do one more thing.
Yes.
When you think about WoW Summit, one word that comes to mind.
Amazing.
Amazing. Okay, let's do another thing.
Okay.
1, 2, 3, and we say wow. Okay? 1, 2, 3. Wow.